Well, thanks for joining me on this business track. I'm Scott David from the World Economic Forum, and I'm going to give you a little overview of the way that we're working with graphs at the World Economic Forum and the journey that we've just started. But I'm sure you might be keen to see, traversals through 1 billion nodes, or gigabits of analytics with community detection. But actually, our graph is tiny, but it is also incredibly powerful, despite being tiny, and it's also under construction. But nevertheless, there's plenty to show. And what I'd like to focus on sharing today is the thinking that led us to a graph and the unique business opportunity it presents for the World Economic Forum and the kind of organization that the forum is, which is, as you'll come to realize, an extremely complicated organization. In the process, I'm going to describe 2 key projects, which are transformation maps and graph search and recommendations. Both of them started their life with a recognition that leaders and experts need a more broad view of interconnected issues and how disruptive change is emerging. 3D printing is changing the manufacturing and supply chains. Self-driving cars are yet to disrupt. The hotel industry is threatened by a sharing economy. News is constantly under reinvention, chasing readership and profit. And diesel emission scandals can impact the automotive industry overnight. Many organizations are going through change, including the forum. But the forum is quite unique in that it is a meta-organization, what we call a platform. And our role is to filter the noise around global issues, to find the patterns in the data and indicate what is on the road ahead for other organizations. We bring together people from the public sector, business, and civil society who have the power to make change, who can achieve mutual understanding and agreement and push action forwards. And as such, we're building technologies to facilitate high-level collaboration and knowledge exchange. But first, the World Economic Forum is most well known for its annual meeting in Davos. It's a tiny snow town on the eastern tip of Switzerland. It brings together 2,500 participants from our member base of the top 1,000 global businesses and other leaders from government, NGO, academia, and faith. As a flavor of what happens there, in January 2015, John Kerry delivered a special address citing freedom, democracy, and the rule of law. Bill and Melinda Gates spoke about sustainable development. Angela Merkel addressed global responsibilities in a digital age. will.i.am was interviewed in one of our smaller rooms. The future of military was debated. Groups of specialists talked about human versus artificial intelligence. And there were plenty of quotable moments. But that overview just skims the surface of the real complexity that is playing out in Davos. It's much more than a conference. For us as the organizer, it's a solution of global complexity through networked thinking. Let's remember that the people who come are in large part the leaders of the world, from Fortune 500 CEOs to heads of state. Imagine the extraordinary logistics behind managing 2,500 high-profile participants, with the same number, again, of military and private security. And then multiply that complexity by the fact that we have 1,500 speaking roles in the program. We have to manage the expectations and requirements of people like these. What do they want to talk about? What key messages do they wish to deliver? Are they seen to be speaking to the most important issues of the time alongside the people that they wish to appear with? All that's thanks to our program team who work year-round to identify the most important issues to discuss and who needs to come together to discuss them. It's a marathon of matchmaking and diplomacy. And why else do people come? Well, they have more meetings with influential people in those few days than they do during the rest of the year. They can meet experts to discuss emerging issues and problems that they're struggling with. Because it is about the unknown and the emerging as well. These days, deep interconnection can conspire to explode, as we saw with environmental regulations leading to the downfall of VW's CEO and share price. So our annual meeting in Davos is not just a conference, it's a solutions space. It's where world leaders come to discover, understand, and discuss the most pressing combinations of global issues. So helping decision makers make informed decisions and take action also requires an integrated flow of content, analysis, and opinion. So throughout the year, with our network of members and partners, we monitor and measure, and we identify trends, and we build an archive of valuable knowledge which navigates that complexity and change, and which feeds into our meetings. So let me give you a rapid-fire overview of some of the products that we've built before then looping back to the potential that they're going to have when it's connected up to our graph. The Forum produces 73 reports and white papers per annum, the most important of which are delivered in digital format. If any of you saw the World Bank's report a year ago saying that most of their PDFs were unread, you'll realize that being findable in digital is incredibly important. Besides that, there's also knowledge and data structure locked away in PDFs, which is waiting to be released and used. You can see the kinds of issues that we work with: infrastructure, trust, new technologies and finance, employment, education and skills, the Eurozone, global trends. And many teams around the house of the Forum have a need for a digital platform because they're also creating data sets and data visualization as part of their analysis. You can see here the Global Risks Report, which produces between 30 and 50 issues each year, evaluating their impact and likelihood, connected risks, clusters, and centers of gravity. It is a graph analysis. And they invite experts to discuss the findings and work with our partner organizations to perform the research. This is all evidence-based data, the most significant of which are our global indexes, of which there are 8, with rankings across 140 economies, comprised of sub-indexes, topic-driven pillars, and hundreds of individual indicators, with additions over time series. We have a data API and indicator catalog powering the back of this, with scorecard pages for each economy. The indicators are harvested, processed, and normalized via our analytical methodology from a number of open sources such as the OECD and the World Bank, as well as from our own executive opinion survey. Our global indexes, just to list them off for you, are the global competitiveness, Africa competitiveness, travel and tourism competitiveness, energy architecture performance, the gender gap, human capital, information technologies network readiness, and most recently, the Inclusive Growth Report, which is a new index which is important for the Forum, which aims to facilitate a deeper debate and change around sustainable policy recommendations. During all of our events, a team from Livestream turns up to stream the video to the world and archive it on their platform. We built a video API with a configurable player that we embed on our own website and that other organizations can embed on those. All the photographs that I showed at the beginning are filmed, and they have transcripts, tagged topics and issues, and speakers associated with them in their data model. And this archive of videos dealing with the global issues is growing with every event that we host, and it becomes a time series of global issue change and the responses that leaders are having to them. Also at Davos, we have what we call the social wall. This is an 8-meter wall outside of the plenary hall. We use it to track the way that the world is responding to our event and the influence and reach that the issues and people are having with the world at that time. The Twitter API gives us details of which leader is the most socially active and the most retweeted. Our imagery API supplies a moment-by-moment feed of the world leaders delivering their ideas. The News API finds the articles that are being written about our proceedings. Custom D3-based data visualizations show them, and 9 experience templates deliver them. Also during our events, our member extranet and apps receive most of their traffic as members plan their itineraries. It contains all the people, organizations, and sessions associated with the forum. In between events, it's a community space for discussions around common interests. It's a planning space for action and global issues. And as you can imagine, requirements gathering or around end-user testing is pretty tricky with that target audience. And they don't use it like Facebook. It's not that kind of a demand that they have. This is where we're integrating the products that I mentioned above, and also combining strategically valuable knowledge, awareness, discovery, and collaboration tools. And it's the platform that's benefiting the most from the graph work that we're doing. So you can see there's like huge potential available for us as the forum. If you look across that data set and just imagine how many entity relationships or subgraphs could be possible, there's quite a lot. And how many traversals could be there through issue identification all the way to solutions. So if we just recap what the forum is doing, it's a content channel, it's a trend spotter, it's a global issues analysis machine, it's a matchmaking service for group collaboration, it's a benchmark data set provider, and it's a recommender for knowledge about global transformations. Now, the problem with unequal distribution of the future is that leaders don't know the weak signals from the noise. And that means that we act as a filter for them, and we make sense for them, and we reframe the view for them. We're finding the patterns in the data for them. And it means that we help to identify and characterize the nature of the discourse, and then we enable things to get done. So you can understand the reasons why we need a graph with all of that complexity. In many ways, it's been in build for over 40 years with paper and spreadsheets, but obviously the complexity is actually growing massively these days and requires some kind of technological action to be able to control it. And our chairman, Klaus Schwab, requested a global issues mapping project as a response to the increasing knowledge gap amongst senior leaders of unforeseen impacts. And this became known as transformation maps. Whilst we had a database, it had never connected issues between each other. We didn't even have a taxonomy. To place a global issues layer over the top of the people layer. So we're asking what we've been starting to do about it. Now, obviously, this is what you expect a graph to look like, and a fairly messy one at that. And this is a lot of the data that we've actually been putting into our graph as we've been building it out. But actually, if the data model itself is part of the product and what is actually interacted with directly, then you can potentially rethink the way that it's visualized. And when we released the transformation maps at Davos this year, it was received exceptionally well. We had CEOs taking over the 82-inch touchscreen that you can see here to perform demos to their colleagues. You can see the way that a key issue for an economy can be affected by a key issue for an industry, and between one industry and another. And you can see that this is a graph traversal stepping through several degrees of separation and cause and effect between distant key issues. And this widescreen view that you see here comes to its own as a facilitation tool for group strategic planning, which is one of the primary usage scenarios for it. It came about thanks to some crucial user experience time during our industry strategy meeting. Watching how our chief strategy officers discuss and explore its data structure, moving from key issue to key issue, insight area to insight area. And what if you want to find an expert from a network to talk to? What if you want to discover sessions at the event that you're attending, dealing with the subjects that you're interested in? What if you want to join a forum project, of which we have around about 60, condensed into 10 Global Challenge Initiative areas? This product surfaces the nature of our graph as a knowledge infrastructure in a way that allows our members to discover interconnections between global issues. And it allows them to help frame their strategic conversations within their own organizations. Now, our graph work, as I mentioned, is actually ongoing. So a lot of the stuff that you're seeing here is actually in the process of being wired together. And the older infrastructures are starting to give way to the newer infrastructures as we go. But just to talk initially about how we went about this, we began with what we knew best, which is experts and issue mapping. And we drew upon our internal issue-focused teams and our communities and networks. Together, we've mapped the key issues within 110 primary global issues, economies, and industries, and the drivers of change upon them and between them. We have teams who coordinate our regional meetings in Africa, the Middle East, Latin America, and East Asia. We have 21 industry teams from automotive to telecommunications, and we have over 30 communities. And notably, we have the network of global agenda councils, the world's biggest brainstorm, with 1,500 global experts in 80 councils who get together in the United Arab Emirates once a year to discuss the main global trends within their knowledge domain. So actually, this data structure is not really magic. It's just a high amount of effort with a large number of experts. So over several months, we built out a prototype content input environment, monitored the quality of what was coming in, verifying the number of key issues that were being defined in any particular issue area. And we also wrote tagging guidelines to make sure that we didn't have over or under enthusiasm. So you could actually call this data set like the wisdom of the experts, or massively human in the loop, or data structure by gigantic think tank. It's sort of like a speed dating data structure of global expertise. If you could get everybody to talk to everybody else and then capture those conversations in a graph, what would it actually look like? This is our first attempt at what that would look like. Now, that's not to say that machine learning won't have a huge role to play in this for us to scale its model and improve its tagging and build its taxonomy. It will. The human expertise will increasingly be augmented by machine intelligence. And right now, this also becomes a year-round data model that represents the things that we and our members want and need to talk about. And it'll become a definition in data structure for our engagement relationships with our members and their organizations. So it's awareness raising, it gives strategic focus, and it can evolve over time. Now, all that I've shown, you can imagine that we needed some kind of a powerful search, which is why we embarked on a graph search project. Findability and relevance are obviously essential with so much volume and so many separate products. All the content and objects in the examples that I showed needed to be surfaced in the right place to the right people at the right time. But it should be more like a solutions architecture than just string retrieval. So whilst transformation maps as our taxonomic glue, our graph will become the central infrastructure that joins everything together as the meta store. And it seems obvious to me that recommendations are just a form of personalized search. Also, a big reason we wanted to do a search project was that we'd had relevancy issues for many years. In 2012, after 4 months of trying to figure out search and get it working with relevancy, we realized that we would need 5 full-time staff just continually classifying and weighting content to get it right. We realized that something was deeply wrong. And at that point, we then just cut to Google. That was on our public site, but on a private platform, you can't rely on PageRank and Google weighting algorithms to build relevance. You're forced to figure it out yourself, and we haven't necessarily found that easy. So the first step we've taken is to move to Elasticsearch and rebuild our index structures with some expertise in hand. And that's thanks to both Neo in Europe and GraphAware in London. The evidence that Solr was going to be difficult stacked up, so we just moved. And the second step was to engage in some relevance engineering, intersecting our search results with our graph. graph traversals supply weightings, contexts, and dependencies that just don't exist in a standard index. And we wanted entity recognition as the entry point for the search relevance and the hierarchy of assumed needs for the ranking of the top 10 results. And we want search and recommendations as an API infrastructure as well, so that we can put a permissions layer over it and use it across different platforms. But why the shoes? Well, one of the first things we did was look at the way a recommender system works, and a data model problem presented itself immediately, and that's a reliance on similarity. So let me give you an example. I normally only buy work-related Kindle books. A year ago, I bought a pair of shoes, these shoes. The thing that surprised me was that 3 months afterwards, Amazon kept recommending exactly the same shoes to me, which seemed really kind of surprising for an organization so large. Perhaps it was because I'd bought 2 pairs of shoes, which I had. Perhaps as such a personal item, they were an outlier. They knew it was significant, but they didn't know how to analyze it. Or perhaps everybody who bought leadership and user experience books also bought Scarpa shoes. Who knows? So traversal of person-to-person matchmaking similarity kind of reaps rewards, but we were kind of curious about a way, thinking about the notion of how recommenders intersect with search. So instead, we started thinking more about recommendations like matchmaking for multiple entities, which is what we do during our meetings. We bring panels of people together in incredibly complex interrelationships of talent and complementary nature that we figured actually that was something that we needed to think about within the search space. So again, it's more of a solutions engine approach that we're taking with search. And as I say, it's matchmaking rather than recommendations. So that's where we find ourselves on our graph journey at the moment, with a lot of really interesting ideas and possibilities to unpack. But the last thing I'd like to briefly note before closing is organizational and technological readiness and how that played out for us at the forum. As all things are evolving and ideas seem to flourish when the time is right. For us, the time for new technologies was forced by the business changes we were going through. We needed to fix search as one of our primary issues. We also came to realize that a standard database would time out if we started doing the kinds of traversals that we were wanting to perform. And it took from 2012 to 2014 to put an issues taxonomy together that we could all agree upon. Our first graph planning was done in 2011. That's long enough, obviously, for the graph world to start getting to a point of maturity. It's also long enough that machine learning work as a service has started to arrive, which we've also started to apply, utilizing IBM and Alchemy API and Alien and others. And the hard librarianship that we would have had to do back in 2011, 2012, it's basically been replaced with entity and concept extraction work using Wikipedia-linked microservices. And that's going to help us to scale our issues taxonomy, but supported by human-in-the-loop expertise. So this next generation of technologies will also bring us new opportunities, which we're exploring and growing right now, and data augmentation that's going to feed our graph. It's going to help us build more as-yet unimagined products, finding the right patterns in the data to help our members focus their strategies on the global issues that matter to them. Thank you. Yeah. Yes, interesting question. So the question for those who didn't hear is, how did we start building out a complex taxonomy? As I mentioned there, one of the difficulties was that it took several years to actually build the taxonomy. The interesting thing about building it is the level of disagreement that is possible and where you need to actually start off from in terms of having a base level. The unusual breakthrough for us was the realization that we actually had teams, strange as it sounds, that were looking after our economies, our issues, and our global issues. And what we ended up doing was basically saying, well, we have these teams and we have these global agenda councils which are dealing with these subjects. So the natural thing, surprisingly, was just to align our taxonomy with the groups that we had actually founded. And then suddenly there was an ownership of those areas, which then started looking after the content flow and the data sets and all the rest of it. So that's become our initial taxonomy. The thing, of course, then is when you've only got 21 industries, that's not necessarily going to scale, but what it allows us to do is to have an entry point into the taxonomy. And I was saying with the machine learning work, we can now start identifying additional taxonomy areas, and we can start scaling the model of human teamwork that we've got against the taxonomy.
So you may have answered my question in part by your last statement, but I'm just curious, do you consider your taxonomy static structures or things that need to and will necessarily evolve over time? I mean, obviously, there's a lot of change in the world. You mentioned many things that are changing, issues that exist. So are you accounting in your in the process to manage your taxonomy and manage the structures around it, some kind of change?
Absolutely. So what you see is a version 1, and you're absolutely right that's where things are headed. One of the things about disruptive change is that new issues actually start arriving. And as we look at the taxonomy that we've got there, it's described by a range of key issues. Sometimes those key issues are actually going to become so important that they're going to become a higher level taxonomy item as well. So issues like 3D printing or changes in battery technologies or whatever else it's going to be, they will probably emerge as new taxonomy items as clusters form moving ahead. So I'd say yes. The other key thing to answer your question is that there's a time series requirement, which is to say the things that are important global issues now and the key issues that describe them right now are not necessarily going to be all the same in a year's time. So actually the next part of the mapping project is to introduce that time series. And utilizing the graph work and the machine learning work, we're hoping to have the entity extraction layer telling us what the emerging taxonomy actually is going to be. And then we will use human-in-the-loop moderation to actually verify what the taxonomy will evolve into, and then we'll generate the team structures to look after them. And then we'll be able to say, last year, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, and we'll be able to start setting a time horizon as well to see how things are changing. So, one last question before.
What's the plan for publishing the taxonomy or the graph at some point?
We're definitely thinking about that. Because the forum is so instrumental in actually helping build this taxonomy and help the discussions around it, we think that there is the potential in the future for some kind of a public good around it. But I would say that it's quite early days in terms of we really need to sort out the basics, and then we can move ahead from there.
I have one other question, which is to what extent is there thinking around casting this as a more standard ontology, or at least putting it into a semantic web form, RDF, et cetera?
Indeed. Again, I would say because it's such early days for us, even though we might believe that's a really good path to go in, I think we need to make sure that we're solid with the taxonomy and our processes and our technology is solid. And as soon as we've figured all of that out, then we'll be ready to move on to the next level, which is how we're going to publish it and expose it, what kind of an API that we may want in the public space or to our members. But I would say that's very much future thinking right now. Great. Thank you very much.